Good evening, everyone. My name is Wompcult, and tonight I will be giving you the 411 on the 411 because I like the 411. If that sounds interesting to you, please feel free to stick around. So, what is the 411? Well, before the arms race of AI that we find ourselves in today, and before all of the phones were shaped like this and not like this or kind of like this, people still needed information. And, some people sort of had a reputation that they were too cool for libraries, which I want to officially stay ahead of the controversy by saying I like libraries and I think they're cool. I recently got a library card renewed, and I think you should too. Supporting a local library is very good, in my opinion. Anyhow, the 411 was simply a long call or information service. But how did it begin? Well, uh, you know, unlike today, where, if kids have an English paper due in seventh grade, they can tell ChatGPT to write it and simply aren't smart enough to misspell a couple words in there. People went through information services and cheating in school a lot of different ways. It's insane to think that I went through all of high school and graduated without ChatGPT. Maybe other people can too, right, guys? Anyhow, also, that just made me realize that there are some people that will only exist after ChatGPT. Like their post large language model integration into society. I get that AI in what existed before, but not really in the way that ChatGPT did. It's insane to think like that. It's insane to have a 9-year-old one day run up to me and tug on my pant leg and call me an old man because I existed before the advent of ChatGPT. Wild. Actually wild. Which is another reason why you should support your local library. Anyhow, people still needed information. If you bet on a sports game in Chicago and you wanted to know if you have to, hide from your bookie that night or not, you would call the 411 and say, "Hey, did that sports team in Chicago win or lose?" And then, hopefully they won. That was sort of the gist of it. You have to remember that pre-internet information was just as important. Um, Actually, some could even argue it was more important because of all the sort of knowledge dump we have now. It's also insanely funny that I'm making this while TikTok got banned and unbanned. I've never installed TikTok. In case you haven't pegged me for it, I'm an Instagram Reels guy. Sue me. Don't actually. I hate lawyers. But information was important. And so what happened is they essentially developed a system where you call and get information. But how did that really start? Well, in the early 1900s, 1930s, you would do that, and the poor soul on the other side of the line had to look through a phone book. If you wanted a classic Romano sub and wanted to know the address because you were going to wherever I'm from, they actually had to look up the address manually for you, which seems like a really out of touch thing to do. Also expensive. I can't imagine phone calls were cheap, and I imagine a phone book would be cheaper after a few of them. But how did it evolve from there? So, 1960s to 1970s, what happens? Well, the 411 bit gets more efficient, Instead of having localized things, they still are localized, but they become better at getting knowledge, and it's not always a person with a phone book on the other line. Sometimes it's someone sitting there smoking a cigarette saying, "Yep, it's off this road on this street," because that's all people ever call to talk about. I can't imagine it was it too sweet of a gig, but sometimes I reminisce about old jobs and think, man, wouldn't it be nice to just have a weird job? I've had a lot of weird jobs, but there's something about, having a weird job that intrigues me. Because then I get to be the guy who's like, yep, I work 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. Dude, saying this made me realize how fast I would fall for the open position at Five Nights at Freddy's and would get slaughtered. My frontal lobe needs to develop more. But basically, they stayed the same. They got more efficient. You need information, you call, you know. You could even call about the local casino. You could say, hey, let's go gambling because gambling is fun and surely you're going to make a lot of money. In fact, people who say the house always wins are just suckers and don't even know how to gamble.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Womp Cult, and tonight we're going to be gambling. I'm joined here by
Danny C.
And who else?
Willie B.
And who's in the front there? Fuck. Yo, listen. I just did the old Womp Cult trick that my father taught me, which is you got the right hand and the left hand. Know what I'm saying? Good evening, everyone. My name's Womp Cult. So I only put in 60 total, and I have 65 out here, 27 here. So I lost it all. What? You're on! I'm walked on. I lost it all. Yeah. Anything else to say? Anything else to say? Shout out the blackjack table that was online. I'm not sponsored. He's chain smoked like 7 cigarettes. Like, I don't even know how. You chain smoked 7 cigarettes? Okay, we're in the Scooby-Doo van. You had a great time. The bank bus. Pantheon!
So that was fun. In case you just skipped that segment of the video or have never played Fallout New Vegas, the house does always win. But what about the 411 from the 1980s and onwards? Well, despite the fact of Bell Systems, or Ma Bell, as it was colloquially known and called, being disrupted, and that's a whole another video, but basically it was called a monopoly, and that one company became AT&T and Verizon. Essentially, it was the same. There's not a lot of evolution. The advent of the computer age is sort of starting to progress, and that's helping a lot, but there's still human factors in it. It'll only be until about the 90s where things start to change. In the 90s, we get these sort of systems we use today. When you call a doctor's office, and it's, they became more popularized of, press one for this, or sort of these digital routes on the phone instead of necessarily having a human operator you trust. By the time the early 2000s happened and the rise of smartphones, it's very apparent that the 411 started to die a little bit, which is okay. And now it sort of brings us into today, the modern age, post 2000s, post, you know, OOs. It's not used a lot. We have the touch of human knowledge at our fingertips whenever we want. We can use that to look up blackjack rulings, perhaps, and other things that people might find useful. The 411 can still be technically called today, I believe so, in some areas, but it's mainly not due to it. In fact, I'm surprised it still exists. I'm pretty sure it might have been repurposed, but I'm unsure. But essentially, post 90s, it really starts to take a toll because of the advent of the smartphone, right? Um, Also, you have to remember that, I mean, the 411 is only kind of a one time thing. I mean, unless you're not careful, but I imagine if I existed back then, I would get directions, write them down, keep a notebook with me. I remember, unrelated, sort of, but I remember my parents saying as a kid that it used to be a big thing to not sort of don't call the 411 service to do your homework, which is hilarious because things don't change, nothing ever happens. You don't call the 411 service to do your homework, don't look up your homework on the internet, don't use ChatGPT to write an essay. um, it is clear that throughout time students will try to cheat and cheat more, and oftentimes it's curious to see who's to blame. Are the teachers to blame? Are the students to blame? Who knows? As a student now and as a student then, I think it's most often associated with the path to, the laziest path, the quickest path to getting something done. And I think back in the day, if I was around, I would have called the 411, as I did in high school, where I looked up the answers to the study guide before a test instead of actually studying. Because if life has taught me anything, it's that I am a procrastinator at heart. Um, but the 411, I think, is really interesting, and I think you should care about it because it shows how these sort of old archetypes are being folded under things that don't even want them to be folded under, right? The smartphone wasn't necessarily designed to be the 411, but it essentially is. And it's also symbolic considering all of the old phone lines we also use to sort of run internet now, right? I mean, in a lot of cases, you have internet cables where phone lines are, and it's very symbolic that we use the old to replace the new, so to speak. Well, if you found that interesting, I'm Womp Cult. I also want to mention that that was a good bit, and that I don't condone gambling or smoking or anything that is illegal or may cause any harm to you. I'm a free body and mind, and I can do with that what I please, such as talk about the 411. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching. Yeah, I think this is cool. It's obviously not a big video, but I hope it was just something to watch while you eat. And yeah, hope you have a good evening. Take care. Womp called out.